Now, please welcome the ISC Squared CEO, David Shearer.
Good morning, everyone. With all that music, this is the Monday session, isn't it, right? Everyone's ready to go another 4 days or so. But so thanks for having the fortitude to be with us here this morning, and welcome to the ISC Squared Thursday morning general session. So at ISC Squared, we're committed in the area of thought leadership, industry partnerships, and raising awareness within our membership about the importance of securing critical infrastructure. And the growing need for ICS skilled professionals. So this joint conference we have here is all about this. It's very important to us to have this topic prominently represented at our Congress this year, and I'm honored to have Galina Antova as our keynote speaker. Galina is one of the thought leaders in the industry space. As a former global head of industrial security services at Siemens, and now the co-founder of a startup focused on enhancing operations and cybersecurity for industrial networks, Galina brings a unique perspective on the challenges of securing critical infrastructure and the opportunities that lie ahead. Her passion for the topic is contagious, and I wish we had more professionals like Galina in the industry. I could not be more pleased to welcome Galina to the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, won't you please welcome Galina Antova.
Good morning, everyone. Let me start with a question. How many of you had breakfast already? Show of hands. Okay. How many of you found yourself in the following situation? You're standing in front of the buffet, empty plate in hand, and then you look to your left, and this is the chocolate donut winking at you, and you're thinking to yourself, whoa, this really looks good. I'm going to need all the energy that I can get for the day. And then you look to the right, and then there's the yogurt. And you think to yourself, well, I like yogurt, but not as much as I like the donuts. But it's healthier for me, right? So every day, we're faced with difficult choices. Some of those choices are as simple as breakfast. But for a lot of us in the cybersecurity industry, the choices could be as important and as challenging as choosing between reliability and security when it comes to critical infrastructure. And what makes all of those choices challenging is that we're choosing between two good things. None of the choices is inherently better. In our breakfast example, the donut tastes better, the yogurt is healthier. So, when it comes to protecting critical infrastructure, we have been faced with the impossible choice of having to choose between reliability and security. And it's time for us to enter into a new era of true IT-OT integration, where we no longer have to make that choice. Now, before we start outlining the path forward, I want us to talk a little bit about how we got here. So, about 50 years ago, when we first started employing the modern industrial control systems, all we cared about was productivity. The reliability of the process was the most important thing. Those machines were optimized for reliability. Then about 15 years ago, when there was increased need for enhanced productivity and collecting more data for business decisions, we started interconnecting those industrial control systems. Now, that meant that we also had to start worrying about securing them, because compromised security could compromise the availability of the process. And now, so here's the challenge. Implementing security measures for industrial control systems on its own constituted a challenge because it could also impact the reliability of the process. So we found ourselves in this catch-22 type of situation, where we had to make the impossible choice between reliability and security. And to make things worse, the industry started really taking opposing views. There were those that thought that IT needs to come and bring their wisdom to the shop floor, and the shop floor needs to be protected at any cost, even if that meant disrupting operations. And there were other people who thought that you just don't touch operations, even if that meant those systems are vulnerable to cyber attacks. Now, about 5 years or so, we got into a new stage where we had the promise of the great IT-OT convergence. The reason that we have two organizations here today, one representing the physical security and the other one representing the cybersecurity, is a testament to the fact that those two realities are coming together. Now, the challenge was that the IT-OT convergence didn't really bring the integration that we were hoping to get. It was more of a clash. As external forces started pushing cyber and physical together, we were faced with a completely new set of challenges. And in order to solve those set of challenges, we could no longer employ the same thinking and the mindset. It was no longer acceptable to have to choose between availability and reliability. So we're on the verge of a new era in which we could have both security and reliability. And I'm here today to talk to you about practical ways in which we can achieve that. So let's think a little bit about what that era will be characterized by. In that era, security will be seen as a business enabler rather than as a potential obstacle to reliability. In this era, our arguments for investment in security measures for the shop floor will be motivated by return on investment arguments rather than just by fear arguments that we see everywhere in the industry. And lastly, it's important to realize that the IT-OT integration will not happen on its own. There is no magic. It will take a lot of hard work from all of us. So I'm here today to talk about practical, and I want to underline practical ways in which we can accelerate that integration. So the three things that I want to talk to you about today are across the domains of people, processes, and technology. These are all steps that your organizations can take today in order to accelerate that integration. How do we bridge the cultural divide between the IT and the OT teams? I'm sure that you've all experiencing some of those dynamics in your organizations. How do we gain appropriate C-level oversight and to the governance process? And also, from a technology standpoint, how do we create and how do we find new technologies that are actually enabling that integration? So, with that in mind, let's start with the first one. Let's untangle a little bit the challenge of the cultural divide between IT and OT. So, you know, we're all technical people. I am technical, most of you are probably technical. We tend to think that the main challenge in the IT-OT integration is a technical one. And I'll be the first one to tell you that this is far from the truth. IT-OT integration, first and foremost, starts with the people that will make the IT-OT integration happen. And the unfortunate reality is that nowadays, and for the past many years, we have had a siloed realities between IT and OT. And the reason for that is that those two groups come from very different perspectives, and they have different priorities. Operational technology, or OT, the people that make things happen, the people that run the industrial processes, they care about the availability of the process. First and foremost, you have to have your production up and running. Whereas the folks from the IT side of the house care about securing the networks and securing the assets. Unfortunately, those different priorities have created tension between the two groups. And as the market forces has pushed this cyber-physical integration closer and closer together, the situation just got worse. Naturally, at the beginning, when we first started facing those challenges, it was natural to assume that IT will come and help the operations folks to improve the security on the shop floor. However, IT came with the tools and the understanding that they had in the industrial domain. And unfortunately, those tools were just not appropriate for the shop floor. Similarly, operations did not have the right incentives to adopt new security paradigms. So we ended up in a reality where I've seen OT teams refusing to work with IT, refusing to allow them to patch machines, because guess what? Patching your Windows machines that happens to be running a critical application needs to be restarted, and you cannot have a restart because that is impacting the process. So operations in a lot of cases said no security whatsoever. I have also seen IT teams push inappropriate technologies to the shop floor, technologies that not only didn't add value, but were very CapEx intensive and wasted a lot of time in integration. So finding ourselves in this siloed reality, how do we move forward? The situation hasn't gotten better. It has gotten worse. The trust between the IT and the OT team has eroded, because as we pushed them together, we didn't give them the tools to succeed. So now you might be wondering, great, this is a grand statement. This problem and challenge has been around for, I don't know, over 10 years, ever since we started worrying about securing the industrial control systems. I just work in X department. What is it that I can do to help the situation? Well, let's think from a practical perspective. In each one of the roles that you have, what are some immediate steps that you can take? So, and let's look at it from an organizational perspective, but also from a perspective of the industry. So the thing that I have seen work best in organizations is just create a joint IT-OT team. It's not a rocket science. Just take folks from the IT domain and folks from the IT and have them work together. Have them learn from each other. Even if you want to recruit externally, it will be very challenging for you to do that because of the severe lack of skills in that industry. Have them work together. Have them have common goals. For example, you could have a network engineer, security network engineer, work hand in hand with an operations manager in finding a process by which they can monitor and protect the OT networks. Have those teams have common goals and KPIs, common management. And I just want to make myself very clear. I don't mean have a IT expert on loan to the OT department for a week. Don't hold joint workshops, okay? You really physically have to have the teams together. It means true integration at that human, at that very, very practical level. Now, what that will do is that will eliminate, to a large extent, the them versus us mentality. And you would be surprised how much can be achieved by just having people work together day in, day out, and just having lunch together, right? So simple, but it starts with the first layer of the organization. Secondly, as I mentioned, you can and you should try to recruit people externally. It will be extremely challenging just because there are not many OT cybersecurity guys out there or girls waiting to be hired. So what you should do is you have an HR and training organization. Go to those folks and ask them to help you. How do we create a program, a training program by which we take people from the IT and we expose them to the OT and vice versa, right? How can you help me with making that a reality? You need to organically grow the talent from within your organization. On the IT-OT Convergence panel yesterday, we talked about that problem, and one of the suggestions was well, we have to start at the university level and we have to train people, et cetera. Yes, we have to do that as well. But if we wait for another 20 years to generate the talent that we need, it will already be too late. So engage your organization in bridging that gap. And thirdly, consider what your business actually is. And what I mean by that is, chances are your companies are producing chemicals or extracting oil and gas or generating electricity, whatever it is that your company does. Chances are that your business is not cybersecurity. So don't try to do everything on your own. It's impossible. You will never be able to protect your OT assets and networks on your own. In recent years, there has been quite a lot of progress in security vendors, ICS vendors, helping with services in that domain. So go through the exercise to evaluate what is core to your business and what are some of the things that you can leverage third parties to help you with. This is the only way you can be cost effective, and this is the only way you can actually go beyond the basics and gain some of the advanced understandings. Now, what can we do as an industry, which is more of the long term? And this is where I'm really happy that David invited me to speak, because he knows that I haven't been very subtle about urging his organization to take a very active role in the ICS cybersecurity certification. So the reality is this. ICS cybersecurity is the wild, wild west. It doesn't get any more interesting than it is right now. There's very little benchmarks, there's very little, there are very little standards, there's very little understanding as to what a professional needs to do. There's some great examples in the industry. For example, the SANS Institute, GIAC, they have some amazing programs. The instructors are some of my very good friends. So there are some initial steps towards that. The challenge is that if we are to train the next generation of ICS cyber professionals, based on the demand estimates that we expect, we will need something at a much, much, much larger scale. And this is where I truly see an organization such as ISC Square really taking the leadership and leveraging their member base and their scale to really bring the thought leadership to that industry. Secondly, to go back to the point of the universities, there are things that we can do more immediately now, and there are really things that we need to start looking at universities and maybe even high schools. So there's been some conversation around introducing ICS cybersecurity courses into the university curriculum. I personally am still to this day not aware of any of those existing. Cybersecurity in general is still a rare find in a lot of the universities. And I really think that we should have a push towards those universities and some of the trade schools really starting to generate content and to generate training programs for the next generation of ICS cyber professionals. You're all here in this room today, more or less representing the physical or the cyber side of this IT-OT integration. Well, we start working through the challenges of that integration, we will need a lot more people that understand both sides. So I'm sure that many of you in the audience would like to have skills that go across both domains. Okay, let's move on to the process, to the oversight. So from a leadership perspective, I mean, of course, like any other problem, we can say that this is a leadership problem. But I think that it's so serious that it's not even funny. You've got organizations where the first level at which the responsibility for IT and OT cybersecurity converges is the CEO, okay? And if you think that there's something wrong with that statement, you're right. There is something wrong with that statement. In most organizations, if there is a challenge when IT and OT are not collaborating, who do they report this failure to? Who are they accountable to? Well, the IT security manager will report up to the ranks to someone like the Chief Information Security Officer, the CISO. And on the operations side, the OT operations manager will probably report to someone like VP operations or the site manager or the COO. In most of the cases, there really isn't one person that consolidates that role. And even in the cases where I've seen organizations claim that the CISO is responsible for both, chances are that that individual is not actually enabled by having the right authority and having the right budgets. So given this lack of C-suite oversight, what are some of the practical things that we can do, and if we cannot do those things ourselves, well, we can lobby for those things in our organizations? Let's start with the simple one. Make the CISO accountable for OT cybersecurity, and make sure that the organization is aware of that. It sounds very simple and trivial, but in reality, it's extremely challenging to implement. It's challenging because even if the CISO holds the responsibility on paper, chances are that he or she does not really have the real authority and the real budgets to impact things. So, but by having someone who you formally appoint to that role, that's a good start. Secondly, in order to ensure that they have a chance, you need to enable them. You need to enable them mainly across two different domains. Give them the authority and give them the budget. Okay, so now on the authority. You might think, well, this is a C-suite level person, you know, they should have all the authority, they're just gonna command everyone and things will happen. No. As I mentioned, we are in the wild, wild west. Most of those asset-heavy industries are represented by geographically dispersed locations. And in most of the cases, those sites are run on an individual basis. So what you have is you have individual site managers coming up with their own programs and their own interpretation of what cybersecurity might mean. So in order for us to be effective in what we're deploying, we really need to have a centralized governance process. It is not only about saving money, it's about having standardization when it comes to the processes and when it comes to the technology that you're using. Just because you have one site producing chlorine and another site producing bromine chemicals, it doesn't mean that you need different cybersecurity strategy for those two locations, right? I have seen a lot of inefficiencies when it comes to how this dispersed geographical location of different assets is managed. So this is the first point. It cannot be ad hoc, it needs to be centralized. The second one is the CISO needs to be enabled with the right budgets. And here, I don't mean give them more budgets, give them more money, find the money from somewhere. No, you already have the money. You're actually already spending the money. There are portions within the IT cybersecurity budgets as well as the operations budgets that are already spent on protecting critical infrastructure. So you need to evaluate how much money are you spending on enterprise IT solutions that are just sitting on the shelves that are not being used. How much are you spending on consultants walking around your geographically dispersed facilities trying to take inventories of your industrial control systems in Excel spreadsheets in 2015? I can tell you that this is really, really, really expensive. And you are spending the money. How much money from your operations budget is actually spent on cybersecurity measures because the site manager met a new vendor and decided that this is the newest and the coolest technology that we have to implement. So I guarantee you, you are already spending the money. So what you need to do is you need to allocate that portion of the budget to be dedicated to OT cybersecurity and to spend the money towards something, right? Towards a definitive goal that you have. It's extremely important. to enable the CISO in such a way. And lastly, you need to ensure that the person who is accountable for the OT cybersecurity has clear, measurable objectives as to where they're going. There's a governance process, and there's an objective at the end of the day. So the CISO needs to be able to answer questions such as, do I have visibility over my OT networks the same way that I have visibility over my corporate networks, okay? Do I have joint SOC operations that are allowing me to monitor those operations? If you're not able to answer those questions, then you don't have the right KPIs. Another disturbing trend that I've seen in the industry is way too many people at the C-suite take the attitude of, well, you know what? OT cybersecurity is a generation behind that of corporate IT security. So really, anything that I do is progress. And I would like to strongly disagree with that statement, okay? In an era where physical and cyber are coming together at unprecedented pace, and we cannot control that. We cannot slow down that convergence. It's beyond us. When you have that reality, doing something is almost as dangerous as doing nothing, unless you can prove that whatever it is that you're implementing is actually taking you closer to your objectives. So you need to have objectives. You need to know where you're going. For example, you need to have security assurance levels that you want to reach for your production facilities. There are a number of standards that can help you with that. For example, the IEC 6244 standard, 443 standard is one example where you have clearly documented targets of what it means to be at each one of those levels. So first and foremost, decide where you're going, and then start spending your energy and your money on that. So again, measurable progress towards objectives. And unless you do that, well, your organization is going to be just like Alice in Wonderland. It wouldn't really matter what you're implementing because you wouldn't be knowing exactly where you're going. So it's important not to be Alice in Wonderland. Okay, let's move to the technology. And I didn't start with the technology on purpose because I believe that when it comes to IT-OT integration, we really need, in order for us to set ourselves for success, we need to think about the people aspect, we need to think about the governance process aspect before we start thinking about the technology. The technology is a means to an end. You cannot just implement technology and expect that that will do magic for you. So there's been a lot of discussion in our industry as to why is it so hard to secure industrial control systems. Well, first of all, we're dealing with a very different nature of machines. Those OT systems are in most cases are legacy devices that were designed 15 to 20 years ago. They have little or no security built in. They were not optimized for security. At that time, no one was thinking about security, as we discussed earlier. Everything was about optimizing reliability and availability. So all of a sudden, as those industrial control systems started getting interconnected, we started worrying about the security. And when you think of networks that are flat, that have little segmentation, when you think of protocols that are not encrypted, when you think of weak authentication, when you think of systems that are rarely, if ever, patched, this is the state of a lot of those legacy devices. And the challenge is that you can't just take enterprise security solutions and slap them onto the OT shop floor. It's not going to work like that. Those systems were not built for the specific characteristics of the industrial control systems, and they will not be able to help with the benefits that you're expecting. So when we think about technology, it's not enough to think about, okay, products need to be able to understand IT protocols and OT protocols. You need to think about who's going to use that technology, right? The purpose of the technology should be to enable IT and OT working together. The purpose of the technology should be to help the C-suite get the visibility into your OT network. So it goes way beyond the specific technical requirements. Okay, so given the challenging environment that we find ourselves with all these legacy devices, what are some of the steps that we can take towards improving the situation? How do we accelerate this convergence? Well, first and foremost, we have to give up on outdated security paradigms when it comes to OT cybersecurity. We have to embrace new paradigms. Unfortunately, there's still too many people in our industries that are preaching defense in depth only measures or air gaps. Air gaps is the concept that you can completely isolate your OT site. And unfortunately, you're about as likely to find an air gap in the real world as you are to find this beautiful unicorn. So I would just encourage everyone to just move beyond these outdated security paradigms that we have. Now, on a more serious note, what would this security paradigm look like? Well, enterprise security has come to realize something that, unfortunately, OT security still struggles with. No matter how high you build your cybersecurity walls, if you have an adversary that is focused enough and well-funded enough, they will always get in, not to mention the insider threat. So defense in depth and perimeter protection measures are necessary, but they're simply not enough. We need to move away from this mindset that we can prevent intruders from getting into our environments, and we need to start thinking about, well, how can I detect things that are already in my environment, and how can I proactively change and update my cybersecurity posture? So the perimeter is dissolving, and this is not something that we'll be able to stop. But what we can do is change the way in which we think about the problem, because prevention will not always be possible. And unfortunately, this mindset, this old mindset that we have, in the enterprise space, that could cost us a lot of money. When it comes to critical infrastructure, this legacy mindset will cost us human lives. I will repeat this. The legacy mindset of how we secure OT industrial systems will cost us human lives. So negligence to have the proper security measures in our domain is criminal. We're dealing with a very, very different subject matter than just the corporate IT. There are many reports that get thrown around. I think that by one of the Gartner reports, they were mentioning something like, by 2019, we will have environmental damage in excess of $10 billion and catastrophic loss of life. And so there are steps that we can take today, practical steps, to lower the chances of that disaster happening. The second point that I'd like to make is that the technology can actually help us escape from this impossible choice that we're facing now of reliability or security. The new mindset can help us to actually have solutions that give us both. It's true, OT cybersecurity solutions can provide appropriate security measures to the shop floor, but they can do so much more than that, right? And so I think that the industry as a whole is starting to agree and is starting to appreciate the fact that we can't just do copy-paste from the enterprise domain. That's clear. We need to build solutions and technologies that respect the characteristics of industrial control systems and are actually purpose-built for that domain. They respect the fact that availability is the #1 concern, and they preserve availability. So it's important when we're thinking about the technologies that we're selecting, that you're selecting, to think of not only technology that does not hurt the process, but technology that allows you to have both the benefits of reliability and security. And lastly, as you go in front of your management or as you go in front of your boards and make arguments for budgets or where we're trying to quantify and explain why we need cybersecurity for the industrial domain, let's stop using the fear factor. Chances are that your industrial control systems and your production is disrupted much more by human errors and equipment malfunction than by advanced persistent threats, right? So let's realize that what's important to the shop floor, what's important in the industrial domain, is not the same thing that's important in the enterprise space, right? And so the conversation in the press is all about advanced persistent threats and the next cyber Armageddon is coming. And I'm not saying it's not. It's really, really easy to hack PLCs or industrial control systems. You know, we joke in my team, it's like not even hacking, you just need to communicate with them. So what's important to recognize is that in order for you to start having those both benefits of availability as well as security, you need to think of platforms that give you the security, but also give you operational benefits. Because at the end of the day, this is how you run your business. That help you with compliance tasks, that help you with increasing your uptime by natively understanding how those machines work. So with that, I would like to run through just a quick summary of the 3 things that we talked about today, and 3 things that you can practically implement in your organization to actually advance the true IT-OT integration. So we talked about the people. How do we bridge the cultural gap between IT and OT? Get them to work together on a true, real level, not just by consulting each other. There's a human aspect to that, and there's a skills aspect to that. So make sure that you leverage both of those. From a process perspective, if your CISO is not formally accountable for OT cybersecurity, he or she needs to be. One person in the organization needs to hold that accountability, and that person needs to be enabled to have the authority and to have the budgets to deliver on their promises. And they need to have clear KPIs and clear goals as to where they're going. And lastly, on the technology, you need to move away from the legacy mindset of air gaps and defense in depth, which are simply not enough in today's reality. And you need to think of technology that actually enables that integration and moves us closer to the benefits that we all so desire. So with that, thank you, and I will open it for questions.
Thank you, Galina. We have some mic runners out there, so we want to take this opportunity to give you a chance to have some questions directly to Galina. So I'll try to manage that for her with these lights so she doesn't have to squint as much.
It's very comfortable here, isn't it?
Do we have any questions out there on this topic? I know it's early, but you know, you came all this way. Somebody jump in and break the ice. We have one over here.
Hi, my name is Joe Lowe, Accenture. You had mentioned loss of life as a very real possibility for OT systems failing. Do you have, I know you had mentioned the Gartner report. Can you just speak a little bit more about that? Just give some specific examples or something that you think is a very real possibility in the next 4 years?
So I don't want to speculate on the next cyber 9/11, but I just think that given the state of the industrial control system security across a number of different industries, it won't take much for a focused adversary to actually cause damage. Now, you know, there's a lot of numbers that are being thrown around. Even from a historical perspective, there are a lot of incidents that are linked to loss of life. I think that the reason that something hasn't happened yet is because no one has actually wanted to make that happen. In other words, if there's an adversary that actually wants to make that happen from a technology perspective, it won't be that hard. And I don't want to speculate as to what the magnitude of that will be. I really hope that we don't get to that. But if we're moving at the pace at which we are right now, chances are we will.
Hey, Galina.
Hi.
Great talk. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. You talk a lot about the bridging the gap in IT and OT from an organizational and corporate perspective. A lot of individuals are still trying to make that connection on their own. What are some key points of takeaway as an individual that they can take that upon themselves to bridge that gap and not be dependent upon an organization or a company to do that for them?
Right, so if you can force your management to actually have you work together. Simple things that I've seen work, literally something as simple as reach out to your colleagues on the other side and just invite them for lunch. You know, engage on a project, offer your expertise on a project where they're struggling. It's just incredible how much people connect and actually exchange views. So I've worked with a lot of industrial customers over the years, and what was interesting and funny and sad for me to see is that I would get into a meeting, both the IT and the OT side of the house, and this will be the first time they'll be meeting. The first time. And they've been in the organization for 15, 20 years. So if you want to appreciate and understand the perspective of the other group, just simply invite them for lunch. Start with that.
Over in that corner there.
Over in the corner?
He was right next.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. And then there's another one here.
For years, we have been giving the orientation of defense in depth and physical security. But what you are saying this morning is that we should throw that away and focus more on enterprise security. Could you be a little bit more elaborate so that we'll know how to go forward? Thank you.
Thank you, great question. So first of all, I wasn't saying that we should throw away defense in depth. Defense in depth is needed, perimeter protection is needed. What I said is that it's not enough. And so just think about it from this perspective. Even the way we visualize, the way we think about security, the way we visualize defense in depth is medieval castles with, you know, water surrounding them, air gaps and all that. Just Google it if you don't believe me. The point of that is that in today's advanced environment, when you have adversaries that are motivated enough, they will jump over those walls no matter how high those walls. So my point was that in addition to having the walls, which you should expect that they will be penetrated, and in addition to having, you know, all the proper segmentation and the perimeter protection and all of those other good measures, you should also have technologies that allow you real time to detect if a breach has occurred, right? So that you can on the spot modify your security posture, right? I mean, in a lot of cases, when people have defense in depth implemented, it gives them a false sense of security because they think they're protected. We need to do a lot more in detection because prevention will always fail at some point if you have an adversary that is motivated enough. And if you want to talk to me offline after that, there are plenty of great processes, and again, it's not just technology, there are ways, there are processes that can actually help us with that.
Hi there. Thank you, great talk. You focused more on the US. Can you give maybe some insight onto the international market? Because it seems that they have a lot less capabilities than we do.
You're right, my talk primarily focused on the US. In some ways, Europe and Asia are behind the state of industrial cybersecurity in the US, and in some ways they're more advanced. So for example, a couple years ago, France already passed a regulation that requires all critical infrastructure to have certain level of regulation, right? So in the US, we only have the NIST cybersecurity framework, which is not a regulation, it's just a recommendation. Germany is also pretty serious about that. They have, from a European Union perspective, some regulations. Here's the difference between regulation and security. Regulation does not necessarily increase your level of security. Sometimes you're just playing catch and mouse with the regulator, and you're trying to make sure that you're certified on paper. So I've seen some good examples in Asia, actually, of things from a security perspective that are implemented in a lot more sophisticated way. So I would have to say that give and take, in certain areas, the US is better. In some other areas, Europe, especially around France and Germany, is leading the way, at least from an awareness perspective.
We had a question down here. Did someone have a question down here? Okay. We have a gentleman down front. Okay, over there.
I think there's two things that perhaps ISC and ASIS can help. I mean, one is standards, you know, both from the physical and cyber perspective, before it ever gets to a legislation part. But the other part is, how do we get the industrial control, the OT people? I mean, a lot are current, but they came from the black box industry, and now they have to get center stage with pure IT. How do we entice them to get there so that we can eventually, the enterprise IT isn't going to change. I understand what you're saying. They have to kind of acquiesce and work with these people to find the right solutions, because the enterprise IT solutions for security won't always work. But it's going to be a compromise on both sides, because you can't afford to implement an enterprise solution, and then if all your OT systems are distributed, then apply security to all those systems as well. So we've also got to entice the OT industry to be able to patch faster and do those other things. That's probably a bad example, but to get more in line with center for IT tools, methodologies, and whatnot. They both have to work together, and somehow, you know, this ISC should help foster that. I don't know if your thoughts.
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, unfortunately, that struggle, that cultural divide between IT and OT has created a lot of stereotypes. And one of the stereotypes is that, well, the OT guys just don't get it, they don't want to engage, they're still in the dark ages. No, we just haven't given them the right process and technology to actually achieve what is it that they need to do, which is keep the processes up and running while securing them. So a big part of that is actually implementing the right technologies and having the right processes. And this is not something that you have to develop in-house. You know, there are a lot of service providers that can help with that. So how do we encourage the OT to embrace that? I think that they just need to see the perspective. I think that in a lot of cases, their knowledge is underappreciated. And you know, when I was recruiting both IT and OT folks, my golden rule was, it's a lot easier for me to take a process control engineer and train them in cybersecurity rather than the other way around, right? Because chemical manufacturing, chemical engineering takes, you know, you need 15 years to understand that, whereas cybersecurity, maybe you can teach a little bit faster. So I think that if we show appreciation to that part of the organization, rather than just telling them, you know, you're dinosaurs, pardon my French, you don't understand cyber, you're still living in the dark ages. They have a lot of knowledge and a lot of understanding as to giving us ideas on how that technology should be implemented. So again, it comes back to just have them work together, have them appreciate both perspectives. And if you're designing, for example, a monitoring solution for your OT networks, you absolutely have to have your operations engineer to work together with the network security specialist to tell him what's possible and what's possible. No, you cannot just scan my network. No, you cannot have a device inline because it's going to mess up my process, right? But again, it's a matter of bringing them together.
Morning.
Yeah. And I just would add one thing to that. It's not about acquiescing on either side. You know, we talk about the dinosaurs, and the dinosaurs may look at the geeks, but we are stronger together, right? And we have common adversaries. And so it's not acquiescing. It's the nature of what we're trying to accomplish here together. Bringing the people together first, and the technology will follow to what Galina has been talking about. Gentlemen, over here.
Hey, good morning. Who's responsible in the organization for educating the board on the cyber issues, and what responsibilities does the board have in making sure that these cyber processes are in place and are successful?
So, I mean, at the end of the day, it's the board that's ultimately responsible. They carry the legal responsibility for protecting the OT domain as well as the IT domain. It's the whole organization. I mean, we saw recently the CEO of Target lose his job because of that. So I think that it's definitely the C-suite level's responsibility to make sure that the CISO is appointed and enabled. Unfortunately, it's just human nature. I think that some organizations, the ones that are more proactive, have realized the challenge and have started, at least asking, the CIO and the CISO about how they can help. For the rest of the organizations, I think that unfortunately it will take another event such as Target for them to realize that they need to do something. But it's definitely the board responsibility to put that on the agenda and to ensure that there's someone, a C-suite level person, that is actually able to carry forward that accountability and responsibility.
So we're down to about 2 minutes. So, do we have a mic for this gentleman here?
So the principle of separation of duties would keep the IT security separate from IT operations or IT systems development. So you're talking about bringing IT security under a common organization with facility or operations on the industrial side. How would you reconcile the need to keep IT security independent to evaluate the security from the organization that's responsible for at least purchasing and implementing the things that we're trying to evaluate?
Mm-hmm. Good question. So I think that that's part of the challenge is that, we keep on thinking about IT and OT, and unfortunately it reminds me a lot about this debate about males and females in the industry and all that. Part of the problem is how we talk. At the end of the day, we have organizations, we have businesses, they have certain mandates. What I was advocating for is to have an organization, call it whatever you want to call it, that combines IT security experts and OT security experts and is responsible for securing the shop floor the same way that the corporate enterprise IT security is responsible for securing the corporate networks, right? So I don't think that necessarily conflicts with what you mentioned, which is the accountability that they have to the rest of the organizations. It was more of like that group of people that takes care of the security for the shop floor cannot be exclusively composed of people from IT or people from operations. I've seen both of those extremes in real life, and they've been disastrous. So what I'm advocating for is having an organization that is or a team rather, that is taking care of the OT, cybersecurity, but has experts from both domains.
So unfortunately, we're out of time. I would like to thank
another
Galina
question.
Antova. Are we going to try to squeeze one in?
Yeah, let's do that.
Oh, good. I just got in under the line. This is a great presentation, really, from my perspective. And I hope I can validate much of what you said, because I believe in everything you said. For the last year, 2 years or whatever, I've just entered this consulting business. But before that, my job was as deputy CEO for an enterprise, we'll just say that. And my responsibilities were not only operational, so I had operations reporting to me, but I also was in control of all security. So I was the equivalent of a chief security officer. And I stood in often for the CEO when we met with the board. So I was the test case for much of what you say. And I had to deal with many crises of a security kind. And crises, drive change and evolution, really. And so we had, people invading our networks. We had perimeter control issues. We had almost anything you could imagine. What I discovered is the most effective solutions are the kind of changes you've advocated. combine things, put your compliance requirements up at the beginning of the process, let people work on compliance in these small teams, these cross-functional teams lower down in the organization, not later on, not work on them in silos. At the output, insists that what comes forward in the way of any change, any solution, whatever, really meets 4 objectives. And the 4 objectives, I hope I can remember them. The 4 objectives are, contributes to the business interest, the business lines, life safety. I managed to convince the board of directors and our CEO that life safety was our #1 goal. And they bought off on that. When you achieve that, then your company has bought into safety and security.
Yeah.
So life safety, the business line, dependable infrastructure was the 3rd. We wanted our infrastructure to be dependable, and so that was the 3rd goal. And then preserving cultural and business values. And so with those, that's how you manage to get the kind of change I think that you were advocating, and that's the kind of change that we had. And then, but it all came from the people working together in the way that you said, the cross-functional teams solving problems as they arose.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So with that, I'd like to thank Galina for this informative talk and thank everybody for being here.